Hi, everyone. In what is hailed as one of the greatest graduation speeches of all time, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs addressed the graduates of Stanford University in 2005. He offered some wonderful bits of wisdom, including the backbone of his message, wherein he told the graduates, your time is limited, so don't waste it living in someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. Yep. Jobs wanted graduates to think and live on their own terms without succumbing to dogma and groupthink. Jobs, it seems, didn't come up with his message on his own. I think it can be found in our parsha in one of the most interesting ways. Indeed, after discussing the two lonely individuals of the Yom Kippur Avodah, who are so central to the national atonement the day brings, and yet operate alone, and then after introducing two mitzvos with an applicability to the individual person, the Torah turns to a brand new section on relationships with a fascinating introduction. The Torah states, "Kema'asei eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem ba lo sa'asu." You must not imitate the practices of Egypt where you dwelt. "Ukema'asei eretz Canaan asher ani mevi eschem shama lo ta'asu." You also shouldn't imitate the practices of Canaan to where I am bringing you. You know, the Torah goes on to reveal all sorts of relationships that one needs to stay away from. This section of the Torah is so important. It serves as the Torah reading of Yom Kippur afternoon. But why is it introduced with this reference to the societies Jews had lived in them in the past and will be moving into in the future? Also, why Kemasei Eretz Mitzrayim, like the actions of the land of Israel, as opposed to Kemasei Anshe Mitzrayim, like the people of Mitzrayim? And why Asher Yeshavtem Ba? Who cares where we lived? We shouldn't emulate the societal norms of those people, period, whether we lived there or we didn't. And the same can be asked about the second warning, to avoid the practices of Eretz Canaan. Why not Anshe Canaan, the people of Canaan? And what do we gain by knowing that Asher Ani Mevi Eschem, that this is where we are headed? Moreover, if Hashem didn't like the practices and social order of these places, why test us by putting us there? What was to be gained? You know, perhaps the message was one of excuse. In other words, your life circumstances do not define your destiny. Let's clarify. Rav Yossi Pasanetsky, the famous author of the Pardes Yosef, notes that the word asher, as in Kemasei Eretz Mitzrayim, asher yishavtem ba, doesn't mean that, as in the actions that you lived there, as if offering a reminder of our historical connections to certain areas. Rather, he notes that asher in this instance means because. In other words, lest the person think that he or she has a right to continue to live living with a certain style because he or she lived within a society and the moral failures of that society are forever embedded in him, the Torah says that excuse is invalid. Indeed, the late great Rosh Hashiva of Chaim Yaakov Goldvicht of Kerem B'Yavneh would note that a Jew has a responsibility to stand on his or her own feet and strive to be and lead more authentic lives no matter what the outside environment brought forth. Rav Shlomo Wolbe pointed out that sometimes it's precisely because we are facing the most contrary extreme environment that we can easily see how important it is to remain true to our values as society debases its own. In short, we learn to march to our own values of Kedusha and not be influenced by the surroundings or use them as an excuse for personal compromise because of the introduction to this section. Kemasei Eretz Mitzrayim, be different, says the Torah. Of course, if we're not to allow for social interference when choosing an ethical kadosh life, a question arises at the beginning of the second parsha we will read this week, that of Kedoshim. The Torah begins the second parsha with a command, Kedoshim tiyu, hi kadosh ani. You should be holy because I'm holy. Now, if we're not supposed to be allowed to use outside influence as an excuse for choosing unethical behavior, why would we be allowed to collect reward for choosing a proper holy path just because it's the one from Hashem? Rashi makes this issue even more difficult as he notes that Hashem's Kedusha is Lamala. It's higher than any level we will attain. So what then is the intent of the social lesson of following Hashem anyway? And not only that, we happen to also already be commanded, v'halachta b'drachav, that we're supposed to follow Hashem's footsteps. So then what are we adding with the mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu? The late great Rav Aaron Lichtenstein Zatzal explained that the mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu is another expression of our original lesson. Don't be influenced by the outside. In other words, says Rav Aaron, unless one think that utilizing logic, he or she could simply ignore the requirements described at the beginning of the parsha as ways to achieve Kedusha, Hashem says, Kedoshim Tiyu. You should be holy simply because I am, irrespective of your logic. And that's the way to do it. However, Rav Yitzchak Hutner adds, we don't simply follow Hashem by fully imitating him. Firstly, we cannot totally imitate Hashem, as his Kedusha attainment is beyond that which we are capable of doing. Trying to imitate would demonstrate our inferiority and water down what Kedusha is all about. And additionally, Hashem has many attributes we are not to emulate fully, or so it seems. Hashem's identified as Kel Nekamot Hashem. He's a vengeful God. Are we supposed to do that? He's recognized as a Bal Chema, as an angry God. That doesn't really sound like our style. Rav Hutner explains that these are clearly not attributes that we're supposed to emulate. Rather, the mitzvah of v'halachta b'drachav, according to Rav Hutner, is specifically in regard to emulating Hashem's attribute of chesed. Just as Hashem exhibits chesed, so should we, even if it seems to be non-connected to Kedusha. Kedoshim Tiyu reminds us that chesed is a part of the Jew's responsibility to attain Kedusha. Our responsibility towards an ethical, personal code of Kedusha is guided by the Torah. Rabbi Yisrael Reisman noted that Kedusha is the striving for and attainment of doing more than what's expected of you. Rav Shechter added that Kedoshim Tiyu involves one doing that which makes him a bigger mensch in all aspects of his or her life. We can't accept the minimal requirements and blame the society or circumstance and then also say, but we're Kedoshim. We have a Kedoshim status. Hashem expects more from us. He wants us to personally strive. You know, when Steve Jobs applied to his audience, the Torah revealed with clarity, don't be defined by your environment. We don't merely avoid Mitzrayim and Canaan, we rise above them. Not because we weren't there or aren't headed there, dafka because we were there, and because we are. That's where Kedusha becomes real. But unlike Steve Jobs, we're not left to our own devices to figure it out. It's not just about having courage. It's about having principles and values that guide our very sense of being. We follow Hashem's path not because it's easy, but because it's real. And in that way, we live the truest version of ourselves, a version that's rooted in Torah, that's elevated through Midos, and crowned with Kedusha. Wishing you and yours, from whatever environment you might be in, a Shabbat Shalom, and a Shabbat Shalom to all.